What is going on, guys? Braden Flynn here from Film Supply Club, and during this time while we're all still confined in our houses, we're not supposed to be out doing things, trying to just keep you inspired by bringing on people that are doing rad things, figuring out how they're using this time well, and I really believe that we've been given this gift of time. We always complain about how busy we are, but now we have this opportunity to sometimes do some of those things that we've been keeping, pushing behind us because we don't have time for that, and now is that perfect time. But also, this is a great time to be exercising that creative muscle. You can be like, when you're confined, when you have limited opportunity to do a variety of things, like maybe it's travel, maybe go to different places, maybe like have different subjects, you're stuck with maybe the same area or the same subject. So you can actually get more creative that way. But during this time, bringing on different people to hear from them. And today on this episode, we have Benj Haisch, who is from the Pacific Northwest. He is a rad dude doing rad things, photographs a lot of adventure elopements. We're gonna hear more about that, but the Pacific Northwest has a decent backdrop to shoot in, but looking forward to hearing from him. Benj, thanks so much for taking the time to just talk to us and share, but tell us a little bit about who you are and just thanks for being here.
Yeah, man, dude, thanks so much for having me. It's nice to talk to people, so I appreciate any chance I can get to talk to some friends.
Well, Rad, tell us a little bit more about what you shoot, how you do it, and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've been a wedding photographer for the last, I think it's 13 years, almost 13 years to the day that I photographed my first wedding. And then about 7 years ago, I started really leaning into the whole elopement game. I've been born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, so being out in the mountains and the trees and forests and lakes and all that stuff is just what I grew up doing during the summer anyway. And so about 7 years ago, I started sort of just going, I want to lean into that more. I want to be doing things in similar locations to where I grew up being during the summer. So I started leaning into being outside more and doing what we sort of dubbed adventure elopements, which is blown up now. It's like its own whole subcategory of weddings, which is really cool. But yeah, I've been doing that since 2013 as well. So they definitely are really co-related, right? But then now I've started a YouTube channel and a Patreon and kind of going in those other educational routes as I was asked to start speaking at things recently. And so yeah, it's been kind of a big culmination of all that stuff, which is why I have this nice little backdrop and everything to record these videos for, right?
So I know you shoot a mixture of film and digital. You're mostly shooting on the Leicas systems, but how did films creep into your workflow and how do you mix those two things up?
Yeah, absolutely. You probably can't see it because I'm actually recording with probably some depth of field. But I grew up sort of with my dad and my uncle being into film, and they were just into photography because film was what we had growing up, right? And so I always heard about my uncle's Hasselblad, and my dad had a Nikon F2, and so my childhood was sort of documented on those cameras, and they kind of fell off from using them. So when I started doing photos and stuff, I asked them, hey, can I borrow your guys' cameras? So I've sort of been shooting film throughout my entire career of sorts, because I started becoming a photographer right as digital was making its massive push, the 5Ds out and all that kind of stuff. But my main thing, especially early on, was processing digital. It just looked so bad. I was editing them in iMovie or iPhoto or everything like that, and I would get film scans back and everything would just look so much better. So I've always sort of had film as an anchor point of sorts to my work. And then being able to photograph my personal life on sort of the same cameras that I had growing up has been a big thing, especially now that I have my own kid and another on the way. Shooting film has become my whole personal thing. I photograph a ton of weddings on film and film during weddings and stuff, but I would say I probably end up photographing more roles just personally because everything that I do for my own personal work is all done on film.
I know you're a Leica guy. Can you tell us about what cameras you're using?
Yeah, so I actually photograph both my film and my digital with Leicas. So I have two M240s, which are my main digital cameras, and then my sort of main film camera is a Leica M6. And then I have a Leica M2, And so, yeah, I'm definitely within that ecosystem for sure.
So you can say you're in the Leica family.
Yeah, fanboy, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. So the Pacific Northwest is, you've got a decent backdrop. It's okay scenery, but a lot of the time it's pretty dark, it's moody. Yeah. And I know like there's a pretty big area. I'm guessing a lot of people are asking you for things all over the place. So what's your process look like for scouting and then also choosing between which kinds of film? Like I know those are two separate questions, but just can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, a lot of it is I'm very much like not like a super directive person. I want to be really, really collaborative with my clients. So we have just like a ton of places in the Pacific Northwest, and then I travel to all over the country for other places and internationally and stuff. But usually sort of like the choosing locations and stuff like that ends up being a really sort of collaborative process. In figuring out, I mean, when someone's eloping here or having a wedding here, they're asking for locations. I have just like, I don't have a form yet, but I probably should, of just questions where I'm going, okay, do you want it to be near forests or mountains or trees? Do you want viewpoints to be high or do you want viewpoints to be low? How accessible do you want the location to be? So there's just a massive series of questions that I ask in that, like, are you bringing a bunch of people? Do they want to hike? Do they not want to hike? And then there's a few different just resources. We have like the Washington Trail Association is the resource that I'm just like nerding out for scouting locations. And I use Google Maps and this app called Sunseeker to figure out what direction the sun's going to be and where we should be at what times and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes my clients will come to me and say, hey, I had a client meeting 2 nights ago that they were like, okay, we have these 2 really significant locations to us. Which one would be better, blah, blah, blah. But then there's other times where I just have like this massive like secret Pinterest board basically of just going, here's all the locations that I haven't photographed at or have, separate ones, and like, try it out. What do you think? And then with that too, I sort of have a few options in terms of digital versus film and things like that. I always bring a film camera, at least one, and document stuff just for my own personal taste. And that'll just depend on what I'm sort of feeling that the location would be best for. So sometimes I'll bring like my Hasselblad, or usually I'll bring a Leica, or I have like some 645 cameras and things like that. So it just depends on like the feel of it, for sure, depending on what I'm bringing. But then I also just have options. So like clients can just pay more for me to document the entire thing on film, or part of it on film or whatever. It just kind of depends on what their preference is, because if someone doesn't care at all and they don't want me to shoot any film, then I'll just shoot it personally and shoot maybe like 5 rolls or something.
So being in the Pacific Northwest, where it's normally pretty dark and dreary most of the year, whether that's cloud cover or tree cover, it's probably pretty limiting with the film that you can shoot, whether it's a high-speed black and white film, or are you pushing film, or are you shooting 800? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so for a while on a lot of my stuff, because I'm shooting, often in like dark environments in the forest. So like a lot of my elopements are, overcast and then in a darkly kind of like lit forest. And so that's where the Leicas will come in handy for sure, because there's no mirror, so you can hold them at way slower speeds, which is definitely helpful. And then I'll shoot Portrait 400 and just push it to stop a lot. So that's kind of like my go-to if it's kind of like a rainy, dreary day that we're going to be in the woods or whatever. I'll just take Portrait 400 on my M6 and push it to stop. That way I get a little bit more, speed in there. And then Portrait 400 is just so incredibly flexible. And the fact that like, I personally feel like when it's kind of dark and moody, in the Pacific Northwest, pushing the film to stop and getting that extra grit and then extra texture and that kind of thing, definitely isn't something I feel is like necessarily detrimental to my stuff. I think it kind of adds to the whole ambiance of the thing, right?
Yeah, I think adding that little bit of contrast with pushing the film and a little bit of color as well, when you don't have really dimensional light happening over just gray or then inside, especially when you're like in the shade of trees. But to shift like with weddings, in shooting elopements, and I would love to talk more about that, but thinking through, I know for me, like I shoot a lot of weddings, but I can't necessarily take on elopements most of the time because the budget is significantly less than what a full wedding day would be. Just can you talk about how you balance those things or run your business doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, for a long time, my elopement pricing was just less in general, but as it's kind of gone, I've realized, and I think that's like a really big sort of misconception, that you need to be charging significantly less. Like a lot of photographers are choosing to charge, like engagement or like portrait rates for elopements, which is just not feasible, not worthwhile. And because especially, this year where a lot of us are not photographing the regular weddings we're going to be doing, we're moving to doing some elopements or something. That's a lot of what my weddings are doing this year. So in doing that, like, if you're gonna build some sort of elopement business, you're gonna have to choose some pricing that is more sustainable, so you're not photographing 70 of them or whatever to try to make a living doing that. And I think as someone who's done a lot of them, a lot of people don't realize how much time that it goes into planning all that stuff, because most of the time with elopements, they're not hiring a planner and they're not hiring all these other vendors. So you sort of become the de facto planner, you're location scouting for them, you're helping them research what permits they might need if it's in a national park or some other state park. You're doing like all these other things that they wouldn't be done by somebody else, and someone else would be handing me that sheet of information, for a wedding. And so the idea that, people should be charging way less for elopements, I don't think is A, correct, and then B, a lot of people, that are doing elopements, we're starting with the idea of, I found at least most of the people were starting with the idea of, we're gonna do a big wedding, so we have this big wedding budget, this big wedding mentality in their mind, and then they realize like, it's not for me, it's too stressful, whatever, then they're gonna go elope, and then all of a sudden they're not paying for a venue, they're not paying for all these other things that they were already planning on paying for. And so they do have a lot more room in their budget than you probably think they do. So I know that you're like in the higher luxury market, so it's more difficult to try to get someone to pay you like 20 grand or whatever to show up for a weekend and do an elopement. But I think a lot of people just discount the idea of they think that elopement means, oh, I'm just gonna show up for 2 or 3 hours and photograph something and I'll charge like $1,500. But it's also doing a disservice to your clients and their particular wedding day to only photograph for a short amount of time. So there's just a lot of things. The main thing that I realized too is there was a few years ago where I just went like, this is too much work. It's more work than I anticipated. And I doubled my prices on my elopements and I didn't see a single drop in bookings. So I was just like, oh, I should have done that way earlier. And I'm in a similar point now too, where I'm going like, my elopement rates are too affordable. Like I need to up them again, considering how much work I need to put into them in comparison to full weddings and stuff.
I think that's such a valuable lesson that you're talking about right now, which is educating your clients or whoever it is that's booking you or whoever it is that you are meeting with to try to get booked for a photo gig, is letting them know sort of what you bring to the table and how you bring it to the table. Because when you're talking about scouting, you're talking about all these different things, there's so much that goes into it besides just showing up to take a quick picture. And I think for when you're working with more like a corporate brand who understands the value of production, it's a whole different ballgame. They get it. And they actually want you to have more production. But when you're dealing with someone who is not a typical business, like a general consumer, then there's a lot of education that has to come into play where you are, you're talking about like, they might assume that you're just going up the hill to take a couple photos. And you're like, how hard can that be? And it's like, there's an old story of the dentist or someone who goes into the dentist and he's got a bad toothache and he's got to get his tooth pulled. And he goes, Doc, how much is it going to cost? And he gives you this pretty high price. And he goes, wow, that's expensive. How long is it going to take? And he goes, it's going to take about 5 minutes. He goes, 5 minutes? Are you kidding? It's like the doctor turns to him and says, I could take an hour if you want. But that idea of how much expertise comes in, how much knowledge comes in to then be able to do something quickly and efficiently and really good is what you come to the table with as a pro. Right? So that element of being able to educate the client, the person that you're trying to book by saying like, hey, here's everything that comes into this. this is what I'm doing for you. This is the value you get. Like that is such a benefit to them. And so being able to tell that story is so important. So then they understand the value that you bring to the table. It's not just the taking of the pretty photos. It's the way that you take care of them. It's the way that you are doing like this element of production, this element of scouting, this element of research, and all of that stuff takes a lot of time. So now if you're going back and calculating how much time you spent on a shoot, like there's so much more than those like couple hours you're actually on the job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, because the idea, I think what people think is, oh, someone can't charge like $8,000 for an elopement because it's just like, oh, it's just a couple people, it's all this stuff, but they don't realize that it's so much more behind the scene. It's so much more leaning on who that photographer is to be essentially their like guide for the day. Like I've tried to just think through all the different ways that I can like serve my clients in that way. So I've even like signed up to be like an officiant. So I could technically like sign their paperwork. And so I've had it before where I've signed their paperwork afterwards and they found 2 people in the parking lot to be the witnesses. And it's just all those other little things to think about. And I think the challenge for a lot of photographers is to A, do that, but then B, know how to communicate and show that value so that other clients can perceive that value when they see like maybe a higher sticker price than all the flood of other photographers out there doing a similar thing.
Have you heard the name Don Miller? You know him as an author. He's written memoirs, but he also has written a bunch of business books. I don't know if you've read any of those.
Not recently, but yes.
But there's a book he wrote called Building a Story Brand. And he has a podcast name, I think it's just called Story Brand, probably, but really good if you want to check that out. But the idea behind that book, he's talking to businesses on how to tell the story of your brand. And so often we think of ourselves and our little companies as the hero, right? We're the hero to save your day. But he argues like, no. You're not the hero. What you are and what you want to be is the guide. And what you're doing is you're trying to convey this message and this story to your customers so that they want you to come and solve their problem. In any good story, any good movie, any good book, there's always a hero who has an obstacle, and then they have to get over that obstacle to get the love of their life, or to become the Jedi, or to do whatever it is, whether you've got like Yoda, or you've got Haymitch in Hunger Games, or any of these things where there's a problem, and then what is this problem this person needs to overcome to do this? So being able to describe that as your brand, how can you solve those problems in your brand is such an amazing thing to do. So I'd highly recommend checking out those books. But to transition and shift gears, this time has been really interesting because so much of our lives we are praised for being busy. You run into someone on the street, hey, how you doing? It's like, oh, I'm busy. How are you? Oh, busy. And you're like, yeah, good, you're busy. And I hate that. That's something I work on with myself. I hate being able to say that I'm busy because typically being busy is not good. The ultimate goal is to be productive, but not be busy, right? Being busy means you're typically not working on the things that are important, often is the case. But this time is so unique because I've said this, I've run a podcast called The Photo Report, and the thing that I keep saying over and over again is that we've been given this stick that's thrown in the spokes of our front tire of our bike and we've face planted, right? Everything has sort of come to an abrupt halt. And in that halt, we now that like it's gone on for a little bit, we have this opportunity to get to some of those things that we haven't been able to get to because we've been so busy, whether that's working on our websites, whether that's working on our branding, whether that's starting a new project or a new creative endeavor or that. But I know you've been incredibly busy. You've been working on a lot of stuff, doing education, building out your YouTube channel, building out Patreon. And so can you just talk a little bit about what you have been up to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is my MO all the time, is like, I hate that I'm always saying like, oh, like people are, how you doing? Oh, busy, like, and that is just so frustrating. So I'm like trying to combat that as much as possible, even in this time. So like, you know, I've been at home for the past like 2.5 months. And my kind of problem is I'm like bursting with ideas and things that I want to be doing even at home. And I feel like I don't even have the time to do them, even though I'm not going anywhere. You know, I'm missing all these trips that I was already having planned. But a few things that I was sort of starting to do, thankfully, as COVID was sort of hitting and stuff like that, was I recently started a YouTube channel where, you know, like, this is actually great for this audience because I talk about film photography gear and just like practical real world use. So I'm not gonna go through like the specs book and like hit all this stuff, but I just realized that I am just a film nerd, and so I'm always looking and watching all those videos and stuff like that. Like I watched the video, one of your guys' videos this morning before this podcast, or this whatever cast this is called. But as a photographer who's working and doing like hundreds of thousands of photos a year, I have like this sort of unique opportunity to showcase these cameras and stuff like that in a way that shows kind of like a breadth of information on them, and like real world scenarios and tons of samples and all that stuff. Because again, I found when I was researching cameras that most of the time people would be like, oh yeah, cool, like snap some photos, and the photos like wouldn't be helpful for the type of photography that I do, or they'd be really generalized to someone shooting like one roll in their backyard in a certain way. And so yeah, I've been leaning into doing some of that kind of stuff. And then I'm also like in the planning stages of a podcast. And then I recently started in March, thankfully kind of good timing, I started a Patreon. So that thing is like a sort of monthly subscription platform where I normally travel through the country and stuff like that during a lot of these months doing workshops and things like that. And so it's sort of an online way for like a really low cost, mine's like $10 a month, for people to jump on and learn and stuff like that. So a few friends of mine have them, and so it's cool to be able to like, you know, learn a few things for people from like a really low cost thing. So yeah, I'm trying to put a bunch of free stuff out there for YouTube, and then like a low cost paid thing on Patreon. And it's helped me. I'm like learning how to do video stuff. So like all this stuff and me looking decent here is part of this whole process, and learning Premiere. And so yeah, it's been cool in that way to like have sort of some goals and objectives to move towards during all this stuff. But then beyond that too, like, I mean, I have like this little like Fuji Film Class W, which is like the camera that I just carry all day, every day. And I feel like it's really interesting too, because this has like the option to have like the date stamp on it. And so through this like kind of like weird, crazy time, it'll be fun to be able to like show my kid and my future kid, who's, you know, my wife's pregnant right now, you know, like these were taken during that time, and they have documentation of it and all that kind of stuff. So finding creative ways, as like my wife is a nurse and going to work this afternoon, and so, you know, just like taking walks with my son and documenting that whole process, and trying to find creative ways to use something as simple as a point and shoot and an environment as mundane as my house to find unique things and creative things. Those have been the two things that have helped keep what's left of my sanity.
There's something really beautiful to always having a camera on you, and it's like, yes, you know the saying that like the best camera you have is the one that's on you, which is your iPhone. Yeah. But to actually have a real camera with you or I mean, you can do this with your iPhone too, but I like film and I like shooting other cameras, and the ability to force yourself even to like take a picture a day, to get out of your own little box and just force yourself to shoot. I heard this really, really cool, I think it's in the book, Atomic Habits, it is. And he's talking about this photography teacher who compares he splits his class in half. One half of the students they only turn in one photo at the end of the year. And that photo, they're graded, their whole grade is based on that one photo. It has to be a great photo. Yeah. The other group they are basically given a grade based on the quantity of photos that they take. And it was amazing. The results were the group that took the quantity of photos ended up coming back with the most amazing images, where the people that only had one photo, they were really, you know, overthinking it. They weren't taking that much. They wanted it to be perfect. Where this group, by doing it, by just going out and shooting every day and shooting a lot and shooting it in different ways and coming out. So by the end of it, they actually got to experience the process of being a photographer, and by shooting more, and it's like the best thing you can do to grow whatever craft it is that you're doing is to do it, to keep on doing it. I'll put a link down to this video. It's called Closing the Gap. It's by Ira Glass, who is from This American Life. He's considered one of the best radio show hosts ever. And he talks about this process, the creative process of, you have good taste, so you start a thing, but then there's this gap between where, like when you finally start to do it, instead of just doing the research, this element of like where you're at, it sort of sucks. But your taste is still out here. So this ability to continue, the moral of the story is you just keep creating, and eventually that gap closes. But that is just encouragement to all of you listening for like, if you're struggling, or just get out and shoot. Force yourself to exercise that creative muscle by coming, like, I'm actually sort of getting on myself for this, is like, go out and take a picture a day. There's so many things that I drive by that's like this old car, this is cool, like, take a picture, right? Or being able to document this time, and the ability to, like, for me, when I got into photography, it was music and bands. And I looked back at old Annie Leibovitz photos, and you see the Rolling Stones when they're young, when they're on tour. And it's like, now obviously they're old and they're still awesome. But those photos of bands when they're young were something that were just like so special to me. And I just sort of like little kids getting autographs from people. That was my way of capturing an autograph, was taking a picture of a moment in time that wanted to like classify. I mean, I shot the, maybe I'll find the photo, I don't know if I can, but the Black Keys, back when their first album came out, it was just the two of them. It's Dan and Patrick, and at a small little venue. But it's like, now they're this huge rad band that they're still one of my favorites. Those things are really, really special. But yeah, being able to continually have a camera with you and do that. But I know, Benj, you have been doing a lot of stuff. Can you just tell us like what you've been up to, Patreon, what you're doing there, what it is, how people find it, and why would people come on to Patreon and follow your stuff?
No, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm like primarily a wedding and elopement photographer. So that's definitely like where that whole thing is leaning. And what I'm trying to do too is sort of just like feed into what that community would, I'm assuming, need the most right now. And so right now, actually, I'm going through, I have a whole class on a lot of the stuff we were talking about with elopements. And so I have like a full workshop that I've actually just refilmed to recontextualize it for this. And I've been dropping a video a week throughout the month of May. And then the other cool thing about that is it's kind of like, it's at least how I run it and how most people I know run it, is like, anytime you sign up for it, as soon as you sign up, you get every other course that's ever been on that platform for that person. So it doesn't like expire. Like, so my friend Sam Hurd has been doing it for like 4 years or something like that. So you can sign up right now on his, and you can go back 4 years of posts. So I did that, and then I've done some like editing videos because I make my own presets, and it's always really interesting to see how other people edit. So I just uploaded a about 25-minute editing video breaking down photos that people submitted to me on my Patreon platform. I spend about 5-6 minutes at least on each photo. It feels like kind of going in depth on how I would edit them, how I would process them. So I had a bunch of the people that are subscribed to mine submit their photos, then I went through and edited them how I would. And I'm doing like image critiques, so I'm going through and someone who's judged a lot of photography awards and contests, I'm going through and saying like, here's what a judge is looking for, here's where you could improve this photo, that kind of thing. So it's just a bunch of stuff like that. I even have one of my first videos on there was a video describing how to take your Canon camera and do this with it without buying separate like HDMI adapters. So we did that, and then we all sort of jumped on a Zoom call like this, and most of us had our DSLR set up, and we were like, hey, cool. So it's just a bunch of stuff for me that I'm hoping is really, really helpful for people that are also in that similar like wedding elopement photography realm. I did like a, how to shoot. Most of the people that I come in contact with too in the wedding elopement world have never actually taken a single photo on film before. And so usually when I'm like going to workshops and conferences and stuff too, I'm the one that's like film Santa. I'm like calling up people and saying like, hey, can you send me some film? Like I want to like send it out to people and hand out cameras. So I'm trying to be like film evangelist there. So I did another class on my Patreon just called like Film for Digital Photographers. So if you only shoot digital, like here's how to shoot film. It's not hard, like, just some like really basic stuff. But it's cool to be able to like throw that kind of stuff out there. And mainly it's like the stuff, kind of my like thing with this is like YouTube is for like a bigger, broader audience, right? And then Patreon's for the people that like want to learn more about how that process is happening. For me, YouTube is more like, here's what I have and like what it does and stuff like that. And then Patreon for me is like how I use that to accomplish the end goal.
Rad, so it's sort of like filling in the gaps to where YouTube is more of the general, this is going into detail and like the how-to.
Yeah,
So if people want to find you on Patreon or Instagram or any of those channels, we'll put links below. So make sure you can go look down there to find Benj. But where would we find you?
Yeah, so I mean, anything that I do is just my name. So it's Benj Haisch, BenjHaisch. It's probably easier to just click or copy paste. But you can find me on that on literally anything. I think my Xbox name's even Benj Haisch. So you can literally find me on anything that exists, but probably not TikTok yet.
TikTok, not yet. But with that, make sure you check out Benj's channel. We'll have links below to all of the stuff, Patreon, his channel, his Instagram, Benj Haisch for all of that. If you click that little eye in the upper corner here, I'll have a link in there for Benj's channel. You can go check that out. He's got a bunch of really good stuff. But really, hopefully you are using this time well, right? Like this is a time that you could be building into yourself, building into your brand. Like you're not as busy as you normally are. Some of us are pretty busy, but with that, like you have this amazing opportunity to possibly pivot from the direction like you were headed if it's not a direction you're wanting to be to a direction you want to go. Or if the direction you were going on was great, now how can you build into that and use this time to either like rebrand or to like start working on that customer message? Go read that book by Don Miller, Building a Story Brand. I think it'll be a really helpful resource. But with that, just hope that you are staying well. Hopefully you're staying creative. We're here for you. So if you have any questions, please leave comments down below and how we can support you, how we can help just creatively inspire you or who you want to hear from. But thanks so much for being a part of this, and we will catch you on the next one. Feel free to check out any of these videos over here if you want more inspiration or other fun stuff. But yeah, thanks tons, and we will see you on the next one.